Well, thanks everybody. Welcome to the Acronis Cyber Summit 2020. Really excited to have you here. My name is Ryan Davis. I'm the Director of Enterprise Sales and we'll be moderating our panel today. We're honored to have esteemed experts from a variety of fields, an end user, an analyst, and a vendor in the space of securing, protecting, managing edge environments. And that's really the topic of our panel today. IT departments have an army of specialists for managing a stack of solutions in their core IT data centers. But the edge is rising in prominence and importance, and they're managed differently. And so we want to learn today how experts and enterprises are managing and protecting their critical edge workloads. So before we get into it, we'll start with some quick introductions here. Naveen, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about you?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me here. I am Naveen Chhabra, Senior Analyst with Forrest Research and part of Infrastructure and Operations Research Group. And as part of my responsibility, I am responsible for global market research coverage on a number of topics, including business continuity, data protection, and storage.
Perfect. Thank you, Naveen. We're excited to have you. And in his role as the lead analyst, he has a wealth of knowledge from a variety of sources. Thank you. Marty, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Marty Martin. I'm the Director of Process Control Technology with Air Liquide. My role in the last several years has been to help us navigate this journey through Industry 4.0, help modernize our infrastructure from the control systems, and put into place plans that do require us to grab more specific data from our equipment to make better decisions. As we run remotely, it's even more critical for us to have the right data. So that's what I've been doing. I've been doing this for about 35 years. I love it, and just I think we're really getting into new things with the Industry 4.0.
I'm really excited to dig into the Industry 4.0 concept a little later in the session. The benefits are massive, but it also creates some exposure that we're going to have to explore. So thank you. And Gary, our vendor, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I'm Gary Gillespie, the Vice President of MDT Software. We're a vendor in the automation change management space. I am an engineer by training. I worked in the space program early in my career and then moved into the software space, working in industries including asset management, EAM space. And I've been with MDT now for 16 years. So a while delivering solutions around automation change management.
Perfect. Thank you for joining. And again, thanks all for participation. So let's just start off from a high level. Naveen, in your role, you talk to all types of organizations, different verticals and different use cases, I'm sure covering both core IT data center as well as edge. And with all of the curveballs that 2020 has thrown us, what are the top kind of trends and priorities that you're hearing in discussions with enterprise leaders?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you're bringing these pertinent topics to the table for discussion. And this topic that we are going to discuss is certainly very near and dear to me. But as we progress, to make it easy, I can break your question into a few sub-questions because there are a number of decision makers and stakeholders whose priorities we will need to take into consideration. So I'll split that into the following. Like number one, what are the top priorities of for CIOs? Number two, what are the top priorities for CISOs? And I'll start off with the top priorities for the business leaders because they have to fall in line, and we can always refer back to these priorities while talking in our discussion. So for the business leaders, as at Forrester, we survey hundreds and thousands of people, business leaders globally. They tell us that growing revenue is the number one priority, needless to say, and we should expect that from business leaders. We also see other priorities that are topping the list, including the cost reduction, and improving the experience of their customers, improving the products and services, accelerating the response to the business and market changes. And I think this is very particular because we look at the situation that COVID has brought to the table. Organizations do want to respond back to the market in a meaningful way. And moving further, looking at CIOs, and I think CIOs are trying to align themselves to the business goals by prioritizing, number one, security and privacy capabilities. Surprisingly, those are on the top of our list of priorities shared by the CIOs. Now, while looking at the pace of innovation that businesses want, I'm not so surprised by the other priority that CIOs shared was increasing the use of cloud, increasing the use of data and analytics technology. Now, why cloud and data and analytics technology? It's because every organization is on its way to digital transformation, improving the digital experience for the customers and employees. So that's the next priority, which is investing in digital experience technologies. And none of this can actually happen without upgrading, replacing, or consolidating the legacy infrastructure. And that's next on the priority list for CIOs. I'll not go further into more priorities because these are the top ones that we consider from the CIOs. Now, connecting it with the CISOs, again, I'm not so surprised. CISOs have the CISOs prioritize number one, establishing a formal technology and IT risk management framework. That's just so important and centric to their role. And also, as the cloud adoption increases, CISOs are looking at establishing security strategy for the public cloud environment, for the public cloud services that they're exposed to. Complying with security requirements placed upon them by the business partners, and establishing a framework to tie cyber security risk to enterprise risks is also on the top of their priority list. And I'm sure as we go through, we'll be discussing each of these or parts of these through examples and how does it impact their decision making on a daily basis.
Absolutely, thank you. And you brought up a broad array of topics, so we'll try and bite off some of those individually here. And Marty, one comment that he brought up that I'd be interesting to explore with you from the industrial side is modernizing legacy infrastructure, because on your side that's very difficult to do. And so I guess
infrastructure is absolutely the hardest dollar to get, because unless you can tie it to some type of reward return, it's very difficult, but you need it. The infrastructure is the most critical piece because it's the next layer, the next thing you put on where the value comes that you're going to help bring the return where it needs to be. My biggest challenge with the modernization and with the Industry 4.0 push is it costs a lot of money. You have to have a plan, and the initial spend when you're talking infrastructure layer is typically a little bit more than what you're going to get in return. But if you can tie that to certain aspects such as increased security or improved backup and recovery, adding edge devices to bring more dashboarding to make better decisions, there's the value, but you can't have that value without the infrastructure. And that is my biggest challenge, is getting the infrastructure dollars, because if you have a short-term mentality, it doesn't look pretty.
Yeah, and starting there for the audience, maybe we should define Industry 4.0 and really what that means, because people outside of the field may not be familiar with the concept and what that trend is. Do you want to define that for us?
Well, I mean, Industry 4.0 for me is the modernization and proliferation of the edge, the new ability, the new way in which we can pull data out and make sense of it. We have lots of data. We got tons of data. Making sense of it is a different idea. And the whole concept of now increased visibility on KPIs, management dashboards, being able to pull this all together, look at the last time you had a run, what can you do to improve that? Getting the data, because a lot of this stuff, especially if you still have legacy that you can't replace, getting some edge device to be able to pull something out and give you more information that's actually useful, that's Industry 4.0 to me.
Yep. That's jives with the feedback that I've been getting from the field, in the sense that building on the automation revolution of Industry 3.0 is now interconnecting it and being able to collect the data, gather it in real time, and analyze it and make decisions off of the data, which is the prime goal, right? And so, Gary, to your perspective, you have a lot of experience protecting the types of devices that Marty would be talking about, tying into an interconnected framework. What are unique considerations that these organizations need to think about when moving along this journey?
Well, in an automation space, many of these devices can last for 15 or 20 years or longer. We see lots of customers still dealing with embedded XP, operating systems that are long since no longer supported. On the PLC side, these PLCs perform a single task. They operate a single operation, and it's very hard to justify an ROI to replace this hardware before end of life. And so these were designed in most of the cases before security was a key consideration. So that really factors into the exposure framework and the attack surface that manufacturers are dealing with. When someone has a malicious intent, if they can get past the other firewalls and other protections, these devices are easily compromised. So cybersecurity changes the equation in somewhat in terms of a cost justification and how we can calculate replacing these devices. But just looking at the importance of getting better security at these devices is a key concern with Industry 4.0 and the proliferation of devices at the edge. We not only see the older devices that don't have proper security, but we also see an explosion of IIoT devices, many of which are rushed to market. They may not have good security around them. And so that complicates the landscape that manufacturers need to deal with when they want to gather more data, but they have to deal with an increasingly large attack surface for cybersecurity concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to explore that a little bit more deeply, but so Marty, to this base premise though, that it is expensive when you look at the modernization and improvement, and a lot of that can be tied back to Industry 4.0, interconnecting these devices,
Correct.
Which exposes them to a broader network and increases your attack exposure, your attack surface. So why do you do it? Maybe we could set the table as to what are the benefits and why are organizations actually doing it?
I can easily answer that. Why do we have to modernize is because we've got systems that are 30 plus years old. We don't have people that even know them anymore in some cases, or don't know them enough to support. It puts at risk due to the fact of who we have to rely on when there are issues, and the fact that many of these legacy systems can't do the newer modern stuff, such as the asset management at the IO level that we want to do very cleanly without putting on all kinds of aftermarket add-ons that make it even more precarious to deal with. That's one of the biggest pushes, and the fact that we have a strong push, like Gary was talking about, these attack surfaces, adding these new things. we have a security policy that has been revamped, and it really makes it more difficult to ensure that the legacy stuff is secure without modernizing. And again, it's quite costly to do that. But if you look at where you want to take it, you have to draw those correlations, and those don't always come that easy because they take time to make those studies, and it takes money to be invested to come up with how you're going to make money or save money, because it's not always apparent.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and it ties into, I think, what Naveen had mentioned earlier in the session, where a CIO's primary objectives are to grow revenue, reduce costs, and improve the customer experience. And the interconnected industry allows you to be more responsive to your customers, allows you to optimize your supply chain to lower costs, which inherently is going to make the companies more money. So Naveen, I'd be curious if you have perspective on this. Are you seeing companies make more investments in modernizing their infrastructure or securing the legacy infrastructure that they have in place? Or is it a mixed bag?
It's a mixed bag for sure. I can't leave as a business leader or as a C-level exec, CIO, CISO. I can't leave part of my infrastructure vulnerable, right? At least that's not the intention, while that may happen in reality. And the latest COVID situation has actually thrown up a number of examples in front of us. Very recently, we have been working with a client that had roughly 2,000 plus people all in one location. But as the situation unfolded back in March, they had to enable employees to work from home. But since they never had a policy of employees working from home, they needed to now enable that. And one part of the response, part of the change that they needed to do was to roll out physical tokens for each one of them so that they can remotely log in, remotely access the services, and yet be able to deliver continued services to employees as well as to the customers. So saying hardware token, is that sufficient? Is that enough from a security perspective? Absolutely no. That's a step, at least one step ahead in ensuring a good security posture, right? So despite the intent, despite the need, the execs would want to increase the security, would want to increase the resilience of the infrastructure and hence the capabilities, but it is never complete, right? It would certainly fall short somewhere for some organizations.
And that's a good segue. We've been talking about Industry 4.0 for the first portion of this, which has been a multi-year trend and led to more of an attack surface for organizations. But 2020 has led to that itself with the pandemic and the rise in the work from home. So Marty, to that point, how has the pandemic impacted how either you personally and your operations have changed, right? Are there less people going into the plants? Or there, how has that impacted you guys?
So I kind of laughed because prior to when the real lockdown started, I was asked multiple times by my boss, are you sure your guys can log in? Are you sure they can get in? And I kind of laughed. I said, did you forget what field I'm in? I'm in automation. We've been doing it for as long as possible. We are not going to have the issue. It's what Naveen said. All of a sudden now you got 10,000 employees that need to get onto the network. Are we going to have the bandwidth? Is IT prepared? The OT side, wherever we have a laptop or a device, that's our office. So it wasn't an issue. From a work perspective, we were able to continue to do our work and keep a high stream going. The issue became, just as you said, getting access to the plants. I mean, we've done some things that I did maybe 15 years ago that was considered very, not many people liked it, where remote checkouts, remote, we started up a plant, commissioned a new DCS replacement, half of it from home, with just very minimal people. We didn't have a choice. It was a complete lockdown and we were in the middle and we had to get it going. So, I mean, we proved that this is possible. So overall, yes, it's had an impact because now things have slowed down to the point where you have to ask permission to go anywhere and you got to get a lot of approvals. So it slowed it down. But in terms of us being productive, not a huge difference.
Very good. Very good. And as it relates to that, doing these activities remotely where previously maybe you would have had your employees on site, how has your security posture changed? Are you a little bit, is it more, I would say firm in the steps, the prerequisite, your change controls? Is there more done on the front end before you start the work to make sure that you're
That's an excellent question. A few years ago, I was leading the team to implement secure industrial remote access. And we already put in place, before COVID hit, a really super strong solution. So from an authentication, who you say you are, whatnot, from a digital perspective, we had that. Where the problem became is the upper level management that didn't understand the depth of how much we had. All of a sudden now everybody wants to see the plant remotely. That started a bit of a concern, but because the solution we had was very strong, we were able to mitigate that. So we've been secure for several years, really secure from a remote access perspective. And we have really good checks and balances on that. So that hasn't hurt us personally.
Got it. Got it. No, that makes sense. And it's a good proactive investment to make, because if you didn't have that, you'd have much more limited capabilities in the current state. And
yeah, that was quite a big, that was a big expense, and there were a lot of eyebrows raised, and boy, did that look like the best money spent ever. Little did we know that this was going to happen, but that turned out to be, betting the farm and winning.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
We were very lucky.
It's very common feedback, and it's one of the reasons that Acronis introduced the remote desktop and remote access capability in the latest Cyber Protect version, to expand off of the core backup and cyber protection we've been doing in the past. Now, Gary, that's also a good transition to you in the sense of MDT delivers change management solutions. And so how would that fit into the type of scenario that Marty described, where you're doing potentially a replacement, or even, I guess, any sort of change? How does the MDT fit into that story?
Well, the uniqueness of the recent, with the pandemic and people not being on site, has changed the usage of the product somewhat, because now there are fewer people there. They're needing to rely more on the history of changes that users have made, so they can go and look at what someone else did. They can look at that history and compare changes in a program they may not be familiar with. They can compare similar programs to see what device changes have been made, and be able to leverage that to make decisions. And also with fewer contractors being able to come on site currently, the ability to allow OEMs and contractors to remote in a secure way and be able to access a particular device for troubleshooting or assistance, but at the same time being able to, from a privilege standpoint, limit their access to certain devices. So it's changed the dynamic that we've seen with remote usage, just because of the nature of fewer people being on site.
And to set the table for the audience, if anyone is unfamiliar, autosave is the solution from MDT that is designed to capture the logic at the automation layer level. So how that fits into the Acronis story, Acronis protects entire devices, Windows or Linux-based devices, computing devices. And so that's a significant portion of an OT environment. But we don't support the automation devices that run on something like ladder logic, which is a lower level computing platform. And so autosave combined with Acronis allows us to deliver protection of entire industrial environments, regardless of platform. So they're very complementary solutions. And as we talk about industrial and automation environments, oftentimes there is a separate classification, and Marty and Naveen, maybe you can speak to this, for managing those environments outside of IT. So IT is known for managing the data center and end user computers, but on the industrial side, often there's an OT group, and which would be separate from IT. So Naveen, can you talk to that? Is it typically separate? Is that converging? How do you see that changing?
Yeah, these two groups are separate, and their priorities and the needs and demands and the way they look at the security posture are very different. I'll let Marty add, before I share a few more examples to just to highlight what happens in the market.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you, Naveen. The IT OT struggle has been there for quite some time. I mean, we know that I've experienced it often, but Air Liquide has done an excellent job of now defining the OT role, which works better with our IT group. And so the OT group understands the issues we have at the control system layer, and the networking, the communication, the backup, the security, all of that. They understand it different than the pure business IT people. But I see that we're leveraging some of the really interesting developments on the business IT side and make its way down to the OT side with a little bit of tweaks here and there. So that's what I see.
Perfect. Thank you. And so that journey, you talked about the struggle, and we hear IT OT convergence a lot, and in some organizations it's realized, and in some organizations, as you describe it, it's still a struggle. What did it take to get you to where you are now? Was there acceptance of maybe the differences in how you have to manage it, and so you collaborate? Was there investments made in teams that kind of bridge those gaps? How did you take it from the struggle to where
all of the above? It really requires you to sit down and talk. You have to have people on the controls side that understand the difficulties of the people on the IT side. And the IT people have to really understand that real time means something different. Security, auto logging off computers doesn't work on the OT side like that. So what I've seen is extending our hands across the table and say, okay, we got to work. I've personally seen that in my company, and that's the only way. When you continue to badmouth or turn your back or make fun of the other group, you get nowhere. And when the company has made an investment in OT, that means they're serious and they want us to talk. And it's helped that we've also had in the last few years people that came from the control side were the CIO was actually one of them. So they understood both sides. So they started ensuring the teams worked. Okay, that's what I've seen. And that my previous company, the same thing, they were starting to do that. So I see it as a trend, at least what I've seen.
Perfect. And so I think the main takeaway there is to work together. Don't leave it up to one side to make decisions for the other.
I've been saying for the last several years, the most important people in the company are going to be the OT controls people, because we're automating more. we're doing more with computing technology, and that's where the OT guys, because if you don't have the highway, you don't have the infrastructure security, you can't make this happen, and they've become extremely important.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And to that point, how does investments in security, backup, data protection, how does that play into the digital transformation piece and the modernization? Is that a core component? Is that a consideration as you embark on those sort of efforts?
One of the things, we're a big multinational company, that, but we also have some other business units, air gas being one. What I've seen is when you start pooling your resources, because we all understand the importance level and understanding that if we think and act together, we can get a better shot at making this a reality, because when you standardize, you can save costs. And we are actively engaged in reviewing, running proof of concepts, and selecting the next level of security and backup protection. Obviously, we're working with you guys quite closely because we're looking at what's the best out there and serve our needs.
Yeah, I think you hit on the key point. And Gary, I'm going to hand it over to you because I know you have something to add here. But the standardization piece is something that is probably the biggest challenge for a lot of the managing edge environments, but it's the biggest opportunity, because when you have a variety of different technologies, it's difficult to do anything at scale, right? If you have various change controls at different sites on different platforms, how can you start wrapping your arms around your entire fleet? How can you enact change at a broad scale? So Gary, anything to add on to Marty's comments?
Yeah, it's a space it's a struggle we've been watching for the 30 years the company's been in business, that the IT OT convergence that we've seen going on a decade or two ago. The IT side did their thing. They ran servers. The OT people did their thing. The two groups didn't get along very well. They didn't talk very much. But now as the automation, as the proliferation of devices to the plant floor is mixed with the interconnectivity, because being able to leverage the device data to have greater visibility into operations and planning, you see this convergence. And we spend a lot of time explaining to controls people kind of what we do, how we back up changes in devices, and how we identify changes. But interestingly, on the IT side, it takes about one sentence to explain what we do, because I say basically we are source code control and versioning, but for the automation layer. And immediately the IT people get it, because they live in a world of source code control and versioning, which is not a perspective that many in the OT space have traditionally had, because you had all these different systems. They all were programmed differently. They all had different technologies. And it's a mess in terms of all these things. And so managing that and having standards that you use for managing change, for leveraging the experience of one user to another, or one plant to another, as Marty was saying earlier, with the decreasing number of people, the expertise pool is shrinking. So you see fewer people that know how to work on a particular device, particularly if it's been in operation for many years. So you see a lot of interesting dynamics going on with this IT OT convergence. And the other thing that's really been driving it, as I said, is 20 years ago, you didn't have Ethernet on the plant floor. So you didn't have the ability for someone in their bedroom on the other side of the world to hack into your plant and cause problems. But now, because of the need to gather that data, the downside of that is that these devices are more exposed, and many of them are from an era when security wasn't as front of mind. So there's a lot of things going on in this dynamic. It does take a proper investment, not only in upgrading these core technologies, but also in leveraging good systems to manage the change control, tracking things like the firmware and software versions and all of that in these devices.
That makes perfect sense. I think Marty commented earlier in the session that they still have legacy embedded XP and other types of platforms. And you bring that into an interconnected plant, there's vulnerabilities there that as a deprecated operating system can't be patched, right? So how you can provide security for that sort of device while also being able to collect data from it is the challenge, and why MDT and Acronis have made such big investments in securing these types of devices. So now, Naveen, to that point, the news is littered with stories of large enterprises being impacted by these cyber events. I mean, just in the last couple of months, Garmin, Canon, the maker of Jack Daniels. I mean, this is nothing new, but it seems like the pace of these happening is increasing. How do companies respond at the management level when this happens, right? I mean, of course, mitigating it is the first step, but then what conversations are happening? How do they respond long-term in terms of being hit with something like this?
It's a very tough question to answer, and simply because there are no set standards, there are no set, cookbooks in terms of how to respond. There is no cookie cutter solution. And I think being proactive in addressing the security, especially in interconnected world, as we look at, whether that's a business need to collect data, to make real-time decisions or what have you. I think the only option in front of, both tech vendor community as well as the end user organizations is to be proactive about security. We have seen a number of examples where organizations simply, without realizing what are the intricate details of, let's say a security attack and what does it take to recover. In a number of cases, we have seen that these edge devices, IoT devices, or the, unprotected XP machines, that Marty was referring to. And we see that at least in the retail industry, that's very prevalent. I think those become the entry point for hackers and attackers. And there have been umpteen number of cases organizations have come down to a screeching halt. You don't want that, but that's inevitable in today's world. And as organizations come to a grinding halt, and there is little available for them to recover. There is little available for them to, quickly react and respond to, such outages. And a number of manufacturing organizations that we have seen would have taken months together to even, come out of the situation of a security attack.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you hit on a term that you used, proactive, I think was the key term. Marty, as it relates to Air Liquide, how do you, in that sense, walk me through how you view securing these devices? Because it's not just proactive and it's not just reactive, is it? It's a combination.
It is a combination. I mean, obviously you do your best to secure them. I mean, we have intrusion protection systems, so it's very limited what can get in from the outside. But you also have to look at the individual device side. Do you still have open USB? Do you still have places where people can bring something in inadvertently? I mean, you have to prepare for that. But you also, one of the key things that I've been looking at too, especially when in our backup areas are, okay, so the worst has happened. You have something. Are all your backups infected? Okay, what good does it do if you keep making backups of problems? Okay, and if those problems can get into your archives and destroy them, okay, you got to have something that says, okay, if the worst happened, let me at least put a fence around it as much as I can. And so that's been really important for me in the backup space, because you're going to see more and more of these attacks. And as well as you try to stop them, there's something's going to happen. Now, the next thing is you turn to your backup. Did that get nailed too? Or how deep did it go? Did the archives get messed up? Do you have software that even understands what's going on if an archive is hijacked? Being able, so to me, that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes to the Acronis investments in providing that holistic protection from the proactive antivirus patch management, vulnerability assessments, reducing the exposure to the event. But then you have to be able to recover if something happens, right? They're called 0 days for a reason, that there's some things that you may not be able to prepare for, and having that reactive capability to get back up and running is so critical. Gary, in your experience, and this is kind of a good segue, are there industries that you see as more vulnerable than others? You have broad exposure to different verticals with your company history. Are you seeing higher vulnerability or risk anywhere?
Well, we're really seeing exposure across all industries. Really every industry is at risk. It's really, the difference is that each industry has some unique consequences to what happens if they have a cyber attack. For example, in the utility space, it might be an inability to deliver critical services like water or power. In the petrochemical space, it's more often to be safety or environmental hazard situations if you have a breach. In automotive, it's going to be more along the lines of intellectual property theft or a ransomware event where you have these situations that come in, and being able to have proper backups is something obviously we've been doing a long time, but we're getting more questions from customers about how to deal with not only what I backed up, but the integrity of that backup. What about the data that's already been backed up, that data at rest, the methods of connecting to that data and securing it. So there are a lot of things that come into, as Marty was saying, it's, if you have a problem, and having 10 backups of it's probably not going to help you as much as making sure that you have good clean backups, because obviously you can stop 99.99, put as many nines as you want, of the cyber attacks. But if one does eventually get through to your facility, are you prepared? Do you have good backups of everything? Can you identify the changes that have been made in the area of the plant that was targeted? And can you rapidly recover from those changes because you've got clean and secured backups of those changes? So these are considerations, because there's a lot of great technologies in the cyberspace that are protecting these companies. But in the event that something does happen, can you restore operations? And really it gets to the automation layer with all the devices, and also the workstations, where Acronis is going to enable the ability to get all those workstations, HMI, SCADA systems back up and running quickly.
Yeah, and I think you really talked to the great cohesion in terms of MDT being able to identify the changes that were made at the automation layer, when they were made, and then Acronis can help at the PCB HMI level in terms of recovering the entire devices. So we only have a couple of minutes left, so I do want to pivot back to maybe taking the broader view. Naveen, do you guys have at Forrester predictions, insights into what is going to drive further changes when it comes to edge computing, or more specifically industrial environments here in the mid to near term?
Yeah, absolutely. And you rightly picked the time. The year is ending and the prediction season is on. So we believe, the more connected and interconnected world would be highly exposed to risks. And this is getting supported by a number of data points that we are seeing in the industry. And just to exemplify, to share with you, I have an example for you, which is more of a B2C example. Back in the day, Samsung launched the connected Samsung refrigerator. If you were to look at how it was passing the user credentials for the refrigerator to be connected online, it was passing the credentials in a pure text form, right? So the protection is like nothing. So similar example. I mean, I gave you this example because each one of us can relate to it. But in an industrial environment, given that these systems are working on, Windows XP or what have you, deprecated systems that have not been updated, but there is more demand to get data out of those systems, and we believe such deployments are the perfect ground for security attacks. This also gets validated by the industry findings. Microsoft just recently launched a report that IoT threats are constantly expanding and evolving, and they saw that the first half of 2020 saw an approximately 35% increase in the total attack volume compared to second half of 2019. So it was like 2 halves of the year compared, and it's a significant increase. The other factor that comes into picture is that these industrial devices, IoT devices, cannot provide multi-factor authentication, which has been one of the methodology, one of the technology that process that a number of organizations have used to improve their security posture, right? But these IoT devices, edge devices, find themselves handicapped, I would say, in performing multi-factor authentication. And that would simply lead to an increased security vulnerability and increased security attacks in future.
Marty, anything to add to that as you see your environment?
Yeah, I was listening to Naveen. You brought up an interesting example of the Samsung and the refrigerator and the connected, the connected world at home. Have you been seeing any information that would suggest that now working from home and having more people working from home in a potentially less secure environment being passed through their work connectivity? Because the automation people have keys to the kingdom in many places. We've been more secure, but as more people are starting to get connectivity to devices that they wouldn't have been, say, in the past per se, is there any correlation to that? Are you seeing any of that rise where the home space is finding its way into the workspace because we're working from home?
These two spaces, very rightly pointed out, these two spaces are simply merged, right? There is no line between personal and workspace. So one of the way to understand that is, let's look at, if you had an unprotected refrigerator at home, I wish you didn't have, but if you had, the hackers can get into your Wi-Fi environment, through Wi-Fi can get into your device, that is your work device. Through that, they can get into your corporate environment. Let's say if you're on VPN, so they find a good environment or an easy way to get into your corporate or business applications, and that's the perfect and the easiest route attackers need and want. Just as an example, roughly a month ago, there was a report published by one of the ethical hackers where this hacker got an opportunity to work with Apple, and just by getting access to one website which was built on Jive platform, these hackers could get into individual iCloud accounts. You would think that it's safe, right? They could get into iCloud accounts, get access to all the data, could get access to admin privileges and admin rights over a number of applications within the Apple ecosystem of applications, internal applications, right? So think about it. If there are so many vulnerabilities that Apple is still exposed to, think of an average enterprise, think of an average manufacturing company, think of an average retail organization, right? Security is an afterthought. Security was given a thought like 2 years ago, if that was a project, right? What's the state of affairs today? We are highly exposed.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We focused a lot on the industrial side of the house, but you're right. They still have computers that they're using to remotely connect. And whether that's a company provided device or a personal device, we're seeing that a lot. Call centers used to have, they'd run 3 shifts. It used to be 1 computer for 3 people to run 24 hours. Now those 3 shifts all need their own devices. And a lot of companies couldn't get the laptops. They were hard to find, especially early in the pandemic. So they're using personal devices, doesn't have the company stack. And so securing that device that is being used as the portal to connect to the company infrastructure is just as critical. And so that's a great point. Well, guys, we're out of time. Does anyone have any final learnings from 2020 or takeaways that you want to share with our audience here before we wrap up?
I'll just throw out one summary comment. I think it's really important that although there are a lot of great cybersecurity technologies there, and they're doing some great things at providing defense, having a comprehensive strategy to back up all your devices, starting with the server room, making sure everything there is properly backed up, but don't stop in the server room. Make sure you've got your workstations backed up, your PLCs, your router and switch configurations, and finally enabling the security features that exist in some of the newer hardware and software platforms for the automation. Some of them don't have it, but those that do, make sure you're leveraging the security capabilities of these capabilities. Many of these software packages today enable you to put PLC passwords on the PLC and things like that. So look at using those technologies. It sometimes is conflicting with ease of access because the controls person's trying to get in, make a quick change and move on. And if they've got to go through and make sure they've got the right password or use the right change control, that's sometimes a competing interest. But it's important to take those additional steps to add that additional layer of defense against an attack.
Gary, Naveen, Marty, thank you so much for your participation. I learned a lot, and I believe our audience did as well. Really appreciate you joining today. And I think we'll move on here to just a couple of minutes of Q&A.
Well, thank you for everyone who attended our panel there. I wanted to thank the participants, Marty, Naveen, Gary, and Ryan. I thought it was pretty informative. So thank you to everyone who attended and also the presenters there. We have about 8 minutes here for questions. So wanted to run through some really quickly just to address all the questions we got in the chat. And if we don't get to your question, we can also follow up by email. So we will make sure to do that. So the first question we have here is, and I can address this to Ryan and then we can pass it off to the group, is if it's data we're protecting and need to protect, why then does it differ from whether the data is on the edge or not? The end goal is the same, edge or not. So Ryan, I'll direct that to you. And then you can pass it off.
Yeah, I saw the question in the panel. It's an interesting question, and it's right in the sense it doesn't matter where the data is, at least from our perspective. If it's critical data, if it's sensitive data, you have to protect it. I think the core purpose of the panel was to illustrate that there's differences in how most organizations have to go about that, because in a large organization or a small organization, your data center is going to be typically managed separately. You have a different security perimeter. You have a different level of expertise. Maybe your IT professionals are there managing it. Whereas on the edge, if it's somebody's home office or a manufacturing facility, you may have a different resource there, a different level of technical proficiency. And so maybe the big metal enterprise tools you're using to capture your databases and your core infrastructure in the data center aren't going to be capable of being used. So that's really the purpose. It's not to say the edge is more or less or difference in importance than the core. It's just that there's differences in the tools that typical organizations would use to be able to manage those different environments. So I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel. Any comments that you guys want to add to that?
I would just echo that it's not so much that the data is less important at the edge, but that the controls, as you said, may be different or lesser. And having those edge devices, which are getting increasingly important in terms of the data they do capture and they do feed into the enterprise, it's important to have those managed and backed up as well, because they do feed into critical decision making within the internal systems, which are often better protected.
Awesome.
Ryan, I can pitch in a little bit. I see a number of your Acronis clients. The Formula One racing cars immediately come to my mind. And today, these cars generate a ton of data, right? That's used for analytics purposes. Now, if that data is not protected, if data is not backed up, there's little you can do, right? And part of that data also goes back to the data center because you're accumulating, aggregating data across multiple cars such that you can find out if there are anomalies, right? So it's not just protection perspective, it's for your analytical use case as well. Now, this use case may be different from the use case that the audience here has, but it simply highlights the need of protecting data, critical data, wherever it lives, regardless of the location.
Awesome. Thanks, Naveen, Ryan, Gary, appreciate it. We have a question here. I think it would be most appropriate for Marty, so let me read that. It says, we feel the pain the panel discussed about IT, OT, and security functions being fairly siloed. What organizational structure alternatives should we be considering? Should it be one group? Should we matrix manage, cross-seed teams, something else? So I'll kick that to Marty.
Excellent question. I've been doing this stuff for many years, and I've seen it done a couple different ways, but at the end of the day, it always comes down to a commitment. Business IT and OT, which OT is a bit newer, think slightly differently. There's a lot of great IT solutions that need to make it into the other world. So my company got extremely serious with this by ensuring that the digital security policy included the architecture of the people and their roles and responsibilities, and that has helped tremendously. I got very good at the IT side, OT IT side, out of necessity before that came, and that's not the way we should be doing it. It should be consistent across the company. And when I saw commitment, and I've seen it at a couple different companies I've worked at, things got better. Prior to commitment, it was whoever knew the best, and there were all sorts of issues.
Got it. Yeah, thank you, Marty. So we have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to address one more question to the team, and then we can wrap it up. And if we didn't get to your question, we can shoot you an email and follow up as such. So last question is, all of our sites have their own processes to handle things like backup and security. Have other companies been able to establish consistency in those areas? There's unique aspects to different sites, which has made standard, or are there unique aspects to different sites which have made standardizing challenging? So I'll address that to Gary. Gary, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Well, every plant is going to have some unique technologies. There are standards out there that, you've got a common set of technologies you'd find across automation vendors. But the important thing is to really start getting good backups of all of these critical devices, whether it's at your PLCs and other automation devices, as well as your workstation, making sure the HMI SCADA systems. So using Acronis to capture all the workstation environment, make sure those are properly backed up, and as well as a product like ours to capture the device data is critical to make sure that you have that baseline that people can start collaborating on, and then you start finding common ground or common practices that you can go build on from there.
Awesome. And just one more question we have here as we have time, and then we'll wrap it up. So this question asks, we're not a big outfit. We don't have a formal risk management process like what Naveen had talked about during the panel. So where can we go to find professional expertise and advice there? So I'll kick that to you, Naveen.
Yeah, sure. So I would say, not being a large organization shouldn't deter you from doing, a risk management or risk assessment exercise. And I think being a small organization is also puts you in a good state, because these processes many times in large organizations span across multiple teams, multiple groups, multiple persona, and that is a hindering factor in the overall progress of risk assessment. Being a small organization gives you the opportunity, the space to connect with your line of business owners, your IT folks, your C-level execs, if at all you need to get additional funds. So I would say it rather puts you in a situation a situation of where you have a better opportunity to undertake the risk assessment. The question, the gist of the question was, okay, should I do that by myself, or can I get professional help? So there are a number of organizations or service providers, those who are aimed at helping organizations identify the key risks that their business is facing, and hence should have a risk mitigation strategy. So I would say, in parts, at a high level, the teams within the company can themselves go ahead with the risk assessment. But if you need help, there are a number of professional organizations doing just that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Forrester can help there too. So thanks, Naveen. Awesome. So that concludes the panel. So what we'll do here is look at any other questions we got, respond by email. Other than that, just wanted to thank everyone on the panel. So Ryan from Acronis, Marty from Air Liquide, Naveen from Forrester, and Gary from MDT. So thanks everyone. Thanks to the attendees. And with that, we will conclude the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.